This is the Books Podcast presented by Tim Haig.
You could walk from Paris to London without getting your feet wet. There's ways for how to do lynx reintroduction successfully in the UK. It's powerful, it's light, it's graceful, and it's also got a mouthful of teeth like a great white shark.
I ask you, gentlemen of the jury, is this the kind of book you'd like your wives and servants to read?
Now then, I suppose we all have a picture in our mind's eye of prehistoric megafauna striding across the home counties in the Pleistocene age, and the more observant among us have noticed that the woolly mammoths and saber-toothed cats are no longer there. Chief among the more observant among us is Ross Barnett, who joins us now by Skype to talk about his utterly delightful new book, The Missing Lynx, The Past and Future of Britain's Lost Mammals. Ross, thank you for joining us.
Hello, great to be here.
I've mentioned the Pleistocene, so if you don't mind, would you explain what that is?
Absolutely. So the idea of the Pleistocene is just really a kind of more technical term for the Ice Age. So it's the period between about 2 million years ago and about 11,700 years ago. And it's a time period where a lot of really interesting things happen. So it's a time period in which our own species, Homo sapiens, evolve. And also, more importantly, it's a time period that they spread out of Africa multiple times, but also the kind of ultimate diaspora, which leads to us living in Europe, in North America, in Australia, and all over the globe, essentially.
Can you describe what the world would have looked like? Because you said that there's a sort of an African scene all across the Northern Hemisphere. What would it have looked like in those times?
Well, the Pleistocene itself is quite a fantastically dynamic time period. So you have a lot of oscillation between kind of global climate that is quite frigid, quite cold, ice age-like essentially. And during those time periods, you have massive amounts of ice locked up in glaciers covering, for instance, the whole of northern Britain, the whole of northern North America, parts of the Alps, the Pyrenees, massive kind of ice sheets essentially. And all that water locked up in the ice also had the effect of lowering sea levels. So places like the Bering Strait was actually one continuous grassy landmass. The North Sea didn't exist, so you could walk from Paris to London without getting your feet wet. There's an awful lot going on.
And you've got sort of, you call it a mammoth steppe, so it's like the steppes of Russia, but all across these continents. The
idea is that this is quite a productive ecosystem during that time period. That you had very different from what there is now when you kind of look at places like Siberia and Alaska and the Yukon. You had kind of quite productive grasslands. You had a lot of kind of forbs and sedges, kind of quite nutritious forage. And it was a very kind of intimate cycle with the animals that were living there. So you had like mammoths and woolly rhinos were churning things up, kind of recycling nutrients with all their dung, eating these kind of nutritious forage that they were getting, and really kind of intimately affecting the environment that they were living in.
Well, they were doing that then. They're not now. So at the end of the Pleistocene era, we've got the sixth mass extinction of species. And, well, there are various possible reasons for that. It has been suggested disease or environmental changes. You think there's a rather compelling circumstantial evidence for a third explanation?
Absolutely. I mean, there's been a lot of discussion, a lot of ink spilled about what happened. Why do we not have mammoths around anymore? Why do we not have giant sloths around? And there are kind of competing explanations. The idea of that climate change had a big effect. And certainly, I wouldn't argue that it didn't have an effect. Just I don't think it was the ultimate cause of their extinction. The idea of hyperdisease, this one put forward by a researcher called Ross McPhee, the idea that kind of disease is swept through these populations, jumping from species to species and causing extinctions. But I think really the one that convinces me the most, and hopefully I put forward some of the arguments in the book, is the idea that it's actually humans. Humans, as they spread out of their kind of homeland in Africa, they're technologically advanced. They're the same species as us, Homo sapiens sapiens. They have a fantastic technological culture that they take with them. They are incredibly adept at producing weapons, at producing kind of game plans, essentially, of how to hunt these animals. And these animals were naive. They had never encountered, most of them, bipeds with spears, bipeds with the ability to hunt them. And so they kind of really suffered as humans expanded outwards. They didn't really stand a chance.
And humans just ate these things to death?
Partly, I mean, I think it's probably a bit more complicated than that. They have obviously they're hunting things like mammoths. We have the evidence of that quite clearly from some sites. They're hunting other kind of large herbivores, things that they would have been familiar with. I mean, elephant-like animals that we would have been familiar with from their kind of evolving in Africa, but also things like land use changes as well. So burning forests down, cutting trees. Just multiple pressures that would have been put in place on these animals that would never have experienced them before. And it wouldn't have taken very much for them to kind of tip into extinction.
Well, I rather pointedly said that this is the sixth mass extinction, and I've cribbed from your book the details of the first five, where you've got, 66 million years ago, the fifth was all the dinosaurs go, 50% of species are lost. In the third, it's like 96% of the world's species are lost 250 million years ago. So although you can put this one down perhaps to human activity, does it matter? Isn't this what happens from time to time?
Well, I mean, yes, that's true. Absolutely. Extinction is as much a part of life on Earth as the kind of speciation, the creation of new species. I think the crucial question is, it doesn't matter particularly to the planet. The planet will always go on, but I think it matters particularly to us as a species. I mean, we're part of the ecosystem. We're intimately connected with how the Earth functions, and so there's only so much can be pruned away before the entire kind of bough that we're sitting on will start to collapse. And so if we want to continue living as a species on this planet, we definitely have to take into account the massive negative effects that we're having.
This book is nominally about lost British megafauna, but you range across the whole world as well, and there are some wonderful images that you present us with. But again, let me get down to terms. What we mean by megafauna, and you also use the term mega mammals. Mm-hmm. What size are we talking about?
Well, it depends who you speak to for some of it. I think the kind of general term for megafauna is any species whose average sort of volume or weight is greater than about 44 kilos, which I think is about 100 pounds in old money. So, I mean, that includes us, essentially includes things like Neanderthals. It includes, in Australia, some of the bigger marsupials, things like the grey kangaroo, they're classed as megafauna, and anything that's kind of bigger than that. And mega mammals is kind of a slightly different subset of the megafauna. So in the book, I've said that's species where on average their weight is greater than 1,000 kilos. So this is
so that's a biggish animal you've got there.
Yeah.
You have some marvelous examples. You mentioned Australia. In these days there were 8-foot kangaroos and 2-ton wombats.
Yeah,
that's an amazing thing to think about. And then in other places you've got a sloth the size of an elephant somewhere.
Yeah.
In South America. These are amazing. Part of the appeal, surely, of these things is the sheer size.
Absolutely. I mean, this is it. I mean, it's what I've tried to do with the book is kind of bring these animals to a kind of wider audience, and I've been obsessed with them for kind of nearly 20 years now, just because they're so incredible. And I'm clearly not the first, and I hope I'm not going to be the last person to be obsessed with them. Alfred Russel Wallace, the co-discoverer of evolution by natural selection, he said that they were the kind of largest, weirdest, and strangest animals, the extinct megafauna. So he kind of had the same kind of ideas about them. And things like the 8-foot kangaroo from Australia, Procoptodon goliath. I mean, it's almost impossible to imagine what that would look like, let alone a kind of giraffe-sized giant sloth with 2-foot long claws on its 4 feet that walked on the outside of its heels because that's how its feet worked. These are kind of crazy species, and it's a real. I feel it personally that it's a real shame that they're not around to be seen anymore. We only have their bones and, if we're lucky, kind of cave art to tell us what some of them looked like.
I want you to tell me one of the specific stories that you tell in the book, because it absolutely caught my imagination. And that's, tell me about Steller's sea cow. That was an amazing animal. And of course, you have a significant point to make about it.
Absolutely. So, I mean, Steller's sea cow is really kind of one of the kind of saddest stories you'll ever hear, I think, in natural history. So it lived around two islands just off the kind of Kamchatka coast, so far eastern Siberia, Bering Island and Commander Island. And what happened was Bering, who was a kind of Russian explorer sent by the Russian government to explore the far eastern realms of the Russian Empire, he got shipwrecked on these islands with the ship's naturalist, a guy called Georg Steller. And so while they were shipwrecked there, they were kind of really in serious difficulty. They were on these frozen islands in the middle of the kind of northern Pacific Ocean. No idea how to get back. People were dying of scurvy. It was really bad times. But fortunately or unfortunately, these two islands had the last remnants of what had been once a quite wide-ranging species, what we now know as the Steller sea cow. And these were mega mammals. These were, multi-ton sea cows, essentially. They're kind of peaceful, like dugongs and manatees. They lived on sea grasses around the coast of these islands. Before, in the Pleistocene, they'd kind of ranged all around the Pacific Rim from Japan through to California. But these were the kind of last populations there. And unfortunately, they were naive, so they'd never encountered humans before. They were large. They were also, according to Steller in his accounts, incredibly tasty. And these essentially saved.
That's always the problem.
they saved the crew that had survived the shipwreck on these islands, and they could basically just wade out to them with their boats, stick them with a kind of hook, drag them on shore, and carve them up. And there's amazing kind of accounts from Steller's diary about how the blubber from these animals tasted like almondy and buttery and delicious, and how they would get so much meat from them. And he would even kind of milk the nursing female animals to drink the milk from them as well. They were kind of a one-stop shop, and they kind of led the crew to survive the really harsh winters there. And after they'd survived eating on sea cows, they were able to return back to Russia. And unfortunately, Steller, who was a trained naturalist on the expedition, he wrote up the notes from his time there, which circulated quite widely. And what happened was that people realized that out there were amazing resources. There were lots of seals, Arctic foxes, otters, sea otters. So it was a fantastic fur trapping opportunity. And basically, people went out there to hunt the furs, and then while they were out there, they ate the sea cows as well. And so between Steller's first description and when we know the last recorded individual was found is like less than 30 years. So they were known for less than 30 years before being eaten into extinction. And this happened in the second half of the 18th century. So
that's the statistic that really blew my mind.
Yeah.
That within a generation we'd managed to eat an entire species to extinction, and that naivety is fairly typical, isn't it? All these animals are things that are not familiar with what happens when people turn up.
Yeah, there's very few places where naive species still exist. I mean, places like maybe the Galapagos, where you have the giant tortoises and some of the birds
which were also delicious.
Yes, I know. It's lucky it wasn't discovered sooner, I think. Antarctica as well, the penguins are kind of quite happy to just ignore humans. But, I mean, we're so used to the kind of typical animal response of them kind of fleeing at the first sight of a human. But it's kind of difficult to get the head around that that's a kind of evolved response, that they know that they shouldn't hang around us because all of their kind of bigger, larger relatives were eaten by us. So, the idea of kind of species naivety is one that's not really well understood.
The focus of your book is Britain and the lost megafauna. So let's do a bit of a cast list there. There's a saber-toothed cat or a scimitar-toothed cat, isn't it? Mm-hmm. I think you particularly like the Homotherium.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
Why? Why is that the one that you go for?
I think it's an underdog or undercat. Essentially, it doesn't get as much publicity or as much study really as the kind of better known species of saber-toothed cat, the Smilodon from North America. But Homotherium was actually discovered first. It was the first scientifically named saber-toothed cat. It has a really interesting story of in the book, I talk about some of the kind of skullduggery that goes on with the discovery of these fossils in Britain, and they're fantastically rare. There's very few sites worldwide where it's found. It's much rarer than some of the other species, and it was just an incredible animal. I mean, when you look at the skeleton, it's something that it's powerful, it's lithe, it's graceful, and it's also got a mouthful of teeth like a great white shark. So it would have been deadly as well.
There used to be cave lions in Britain, and you've described it as the most successful land mammal before us, so they were everywhere. How different were they from the lions that we still have?
You would have still recognized them. I mean, the cave lions are one of the species that I've spent probably the majority of my kind of professional life working in.
Were they bigger?
They were bigger, yeah, absolutely bigger. They were kind of... I think they were still within the kind of range of what a big African lion would look like now. But I mean, we have, luckily, for cave lions, quite a large number of images of them painted on walls of places like Chauvet Cave in France, Lascaux, other places. There's some really good carvings made from mammoth ivory from some cave sites in Germany as well. And so these have actually given a kind of extra layer on our understanding of the cave lion. So we have the bones. I've worked on some of the genetics of them, but we also have the kind of cave art from people that saw them, which is the most important thing. These are kind of like drawn from life. People saw these animals and pictured them on the walls. So
that's right, because all of these animals were encountered by people like us.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned, we also had woolly mammoths and woolly rhinos. Rhinos in Britain. The woolly mammoth, I think you say, finally died out only 2,500 years ago.
2,500 years BC. So about kind of 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, it died out, the last ones. So they were, later than the pyramids, later than Stonehenge, and they survived on this reasonably small island on the north of Siberia. Which was kind of slightly isolated at the end of the Pleistocene with its own kind of population of mammoths there. And then suddenly, just after the kind of archaeological evidence for people arriving on this island, Wrangel Island, they seemed to disappear.
That's one of the reasons you don't think that environmental changes are the reason for extinctions, isn't it? Because occasionally a population would get isolated where we couldn't get at them, and they would survive thousands of years longer than the rest.
I mean, I can't get my head around what small, non-optimal habitat for mammoths, Wrangel Island, this kind of high Arctic island off the north coast of Siberia. Why is it that this place, separated by only about 80 kilometers from the mainland, has a population of mammoths for 6,000 years after they die out everywhere else on the mainland of Eurasia? I mean, the climate is going to be the same. There's only 80 kilometers difference between the mainland and the island. As far as I can see, the only difference is that the mainland has humans during that time period and Wrangel Island doesn't. And then when we have evidence for humans turning up, that's when the Wrangel population disappears.
Well, that's a smoking gun if ever there was one. What else? We've got Irish elk, we've got bears, of course, the northern lynx. Well, so these are things we've lost. Mm-hmm. We want to ask what's our response going to be. We could just leave it be and say, we're a destructive species and it's all gone. But some people have different ideas. Basically, the three that you suggest: reintroduction, reconstructing an extinct species, and rewilding. Let's consider those. And I'm really wondering what you think is the preferable or the more desirable of these approaches. Reintroduction, for instance, that has happened. Beaver.
Yes, so the beaver is, I would say, the success story of British conservation for the past 20 years. They're back. They're back in Scotland, England, Wales, and they're successful. And not many people are particularly bothered by the return. So you have populations in Argyll in Scotland, you have populations in Tayside, you have kind of Cornish populations and Welsh populations as well, and they're back. They're doing their thing. They're habitat engineers par excellence. They arrive in a place, they modify it, and their modification helps to make the area more productive. You have greater diversity of insect life within the ponds, greater diversity in the woodland around where they have their lodges, because they kind of do essentially natural coppicing. They're bringing down trees and letting sunlight in to encourage competition with other tree species. So they're back, and I think it's a fantastic thing that's been done. And hopefully, it's just a first step. It's not the end of the line.
Well, we can't reintroduce the woolly mammoth for obvious reasons, but how desirable is the reintroduction of, say, the lynx or wolves? Why not wolves?
Well, I mean, wolves is something that's been talked about certainly as long as I've been alive. And I'm from the north of Scotland, where essentially that's people want to bring them back to here. Various private landlords have sort of gone some of the way there, but it's something that's been talked about for an awful long time. And there are risks with bringing the wolf back. They're not huge risks. People live quite happily side by side with wolves in North America, in kind of Eastern and Southern Asia. But there are risks which make it kind of a difficult sell to many people. I think definitely the next step has to be the lynx. So, lynx are incredible. They're beautiful. They're secretive. They're shy. They live very successfully with people. They've been reintroduced into other places where they'd gone extinct before. Places like the Italian Alps, places like Eastern European mountain ranges as well. And they can. There's ways. There's examples that can be followed for how to do lynx reintroduction successfully in the UK. And I think it would be amazing. I mean, lynx are native. We've only kind of recently, in the past sort of 10, 15 years, thanks to work by a colleague called Dave Hetherington, discovered that they didn't go extinct at the end of the Ice Age, which is what some people used to think. They actually survived until medieval time period, so 7th, 8th century AD. And that kind of changes their story slightly, enough that people have to think about reintroducing them. So a 7th, 8th century AD extinction can't be anything to do with climate, because the climate then is the same as now. There wasn't anything going on that could have tipped them over the edge. But there is a lot of kind of land use changes. There's forests being cleared, other kind of things that would have had a big effect on lynx population. So it really places the responsibility back onto us as humans to bring them back into the UK, because we were the ones that got rid of them. And I for one would absolutely love to see it. I've seen one species of lynx in the wild. I'm reasonably familiar with Eurasian lynx, the species that we had in the UK, and they're just incredible animals.
We'd all love to see woolly mammoths, although, of course, that's a bit of a Jurassic Park scenario. Reconstructing it. This was one of the things that absolutely blew my mind. You mentioned that it's fantastically difficult to artificially inseminate elephants.
Yes.
Because, I'm going to let you say it, because it's too delicious to steal. Because why?
Well, elephants are pregnant for 24 months. They have the kind of longest mammalian pregnancy that we know of. And so they spend a lot of time pregnant, and they have a whole bunch of mechanisms. I'm not sure how family friendly the podcast is supposed to be.
You can say it. You must say it. You must say it.
They have kind of very impermeable hymens, which basically prevent anything getting through. You would not be able to transfer an embryo through an elephant hymen. And sperm barely get through when they're supposed to get through naturally. And this is a structure. It's elastic and it's impermeable. And it regrows. So even after a successful pregnancy, if we found a kind of postpartum elephant that was volunteered for these kind of projects, that the hymen grows back, and so just getting an in vitro embryo into an elephant is more or less impossible with current technology. So.
See, that is something I did not know and will never forget. I'm going to trot that out at parties. But the woolly mammoth is probably not much of a prospect. Is it going to ever be possible to reconstruct an extinct species from DNA? In a Jurassic Park way? Well,
there's a lot of work going on down that kind of road. And so my friend, Professor Beth Shapiro, has written a book called How to Clone a Mammoth, which talks about some of the pitfalls like elephant hymens and all the other kind of problems that lie on the path to cloning a mammoth successfully. But I think more importantly than that, the kind of questions we need to be asking are, would it be worth it? We have a world right now where elephants are in trouble, where poaching for ivory, landscape destruction, habitat deforestation are massive issues. And so we have 3 species of elephant at the moment, 2 in Africa and 1 in India, and they're all in trouble. And does it really make sense to bring back mammoths when we can't even live peacefully with elephants?
Well, that brings us to the third prospect, rewilding. I'm going to make a guess that you're quite keen on that one.
Yeah, definitely. I think that there's places where it's been done, and it seems to have interesting effects. So one place where it's happening at the moment, Pleistocene Park, which is this kind of open air lab in northern Siberia, where people, Sergei Zimov and his family, have imported megafauna back to what is currently the Siberian tundra. So they've brought in wild horses, muskox, reindeer, bison as well, and other kind of megafauna as a kind of natural experiment to see whether rewilding can also have an effect on the habitat there. And they're finding that it can. So they're trying to find surrogates essentially for the woolly mammoths and the woolly rhinos to see if the kind of ecological interactions can be brought back, even if the species can't. And so they're seeing things like the action of these mega herbivores churning up the kind of frozen ground, moving dung around, knocking down trees, is actually making the permafrost regions more productive. They're kind of almost moving back towards the mammoth steppe environment as it was then. So I think that's kind of one way to look at rewilding, is the idea of restoring ecological interactions that have been lost through extinction. But it's a tricky one. I mean, there's places where it could work, and there's places where it might be more difficult.
Ross, that's it's an interesting prospect. The book, on the other hand, is just a delight. I really enjoyed it. There was so much to find out and to learn, and it's one of those puppyish books that goes, ooh, let me tell you something on every page. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
The book is The Missing Lynx, The Past and Future of Britain's Lost Mammals. It's by Ross Barnett, published by Bloomsbury at $16.99, and I can't recommend it too highly. Ross, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was the Books Podcast, presented by Tim Haig. The Books Podcast is a Green Shoot production. More details can be found at www.green-shoot.com, and Tim can be reached on tim@green-shoot.com.